I think he was always a great champion of young people's possibilities. And really what he wanted to try to do was to... I suspect that if he had made it to his 100th birthday...
After years of silence, Prince Edward may have finally said what no one expected. And the alleged fallout has left King Charles reeling. Rumors are flying, tensions are rising. What secret about Diana was too heavy to carry any longer? Stick around to find out, and make sure to subscribe. Prince Edward has always lived behind the curtain, calm, respectful, and almost invisible compared to the spotlight-heavy lives of his royal siblings. While headlines swirled around Charles, Andrew, and even Anne at times, Edward stayed quiet. He was the royal family's steady hand, the one who rarely gave interviews, never courted attention, and almost never stirred controversy. For years, he was the example of royal discretion. No dramatic interviews, no scandalous press, just loyal service and quiet support for the crown. In fact, many believed he would take whatever secrets he held with him, never to be shared with the public. That's why what just happened has left so many stunned. At the age of 61, Edward has allegedly broken his silence. And not about politics, not about royal tradition, but about Princess Diana, one of the most emotionally charged figures in royal history. Even more surprising, his words weren't vague or diplomatic. They were personal, emotional, and possibly critical. Insiders close to the palace say the comments, shared in a private setting, have shaken the royal household, especially King Charles. But what could Edward, the most quiet and composed of the Queen's children, have said that would rattle the very institution he served so loyally? Why now, after all these years of silence, did he choose to speak about Diana? Some believe the answer lies in decades of quiet observation, bottled up emotion, and perhaps even guilt. And according to those closest to the family, this is only the beginning of what might be a much larger reckoning. From the outside, the relationship between Prince Edward and Princess Diana barely registered. They weren't often photographed together, rarely seen interacting during public events, and were never the focus of media speculation. But beneath that quiet exterior was something much more powerful, a bond that didn't need words to be understood. It started subtly, almost invisibly. While other members of the royal family seemed distant, formal, or even critical of Diana, Edward was different. He didn't lecture her or ignore her, he simply listened. Those close to the palace have spoken in hushed tones about Edward being the only one who consistently showed Diana gentle respect, not just the routine kind of politeness expected in royal circles, but a quiet, sincere kind of concern that stood out. It's said that in her most emotionally difficult moments, he would ask a question no one else seemed to think to ask. "Are you okay?" Those 4 words reportedly created a bridge between them. Diana, surrounded by cold formality, rarely found someone who treated her like a human being rather than a royal title. Edward's presence wasn't loud or heroic, it was calm, grounded, and compassionate. And in an environment that often felt suffocating, that kind of emotional safety was rare. One former royal staff member recalled that whenever Diana entered a room, Edward was the only one who would stand and walk toward her, not out of duty, but out of something deeper: respect, concern, maybe even quiet solidarity. It was a small gesture, but in a world where small things speak volumes, it was noticed by those who paid attention. In fact, there are rumors of private letters Diana once wrote to a close confidant. In one of them, it said she mentioned Edward by name, writing something that still lingers in whispers. "Edward understands me in a way Charles never cared to." No drama, no headlines, just a quiet, invisible alliance built on empathy. They didn't meet often. There were no long private conversations or secret visits that anyone knows of. But when they were in the same space, there was an unspoken connection. Their glances reportedly carried more meaning than full conversations did with others. And that closeness, however subtle, didn't go unnoticed inside the family. It's believed that Prince Charles once grew suspicious of Edward's bond with Diana. At a private gathering at Balmoral, Charles is said to have questioned him, accusing Edward of taking her side and not understanding the damage Diana was doing to the family's image. Edward didn't respond with anger. He didn't try to explain, he simply left the room. That quiet exit wasn't seen as weakness. To those who understand him, it was Edward's way of drawing a line, choosing silence over confrontation, but making his stance clear all the same. Over the years, their connection remained unspoken, but steady. Diana reportedly knew she had at least one person in the royal family who didn't look at her with judgment, but with understanding. And Edward, the silent observer, kept watching the emotional weight Diana carried, watching how her openness clashed with royal expectations, watching as the very system they were all born into slowly pushed her further and further to the edges. He never interrupted, never interfered, but he saw everything. And in time, what he witnessed would quietly shape his own perspective on what truly happened behind palace doors. The royal family is famous for its image, polished, composed, and always smiling in public. But behind that glittering curtain lies a very different story, one that Prince Edward saw unfold in real time. From the early days of Diana's royal journey, Edward quietly observed what many didn't want to see. He saw her at grand ceremonies, dressed in elegance, waving to the crowds with that signature smile. But he also noticed the subtle moments others missed. The way her smile sometimes faded just a little too fast. The tired eyes, the forced cheer, it was a mask she wore well. But Edward, with his quiet and perceptive nature, could see past it. Behind the cameras and rehearsed appearances, Diana was battling loneliness. She wasn't just adjusting to life as a royal, she was surviving it. The palace, with its endless rules and traditions, wasn't built for someone who felt deeply and loved openly. And Edward saw how that emotional honesty didn't fit within the system. It was almost as if her feelings were too big for the corridors of Buckingham Palace. He watched as phone calls went unanswered, invitations quietly withdrawn, and conversations shifted when she walked into the room. The energy around Diana changed, sometimes warm, often awkward, but never truly accepting. Edward, unlike others, didn't look away. He didn't criticize her behind her back. Instead, he simply stood by, not loudly, not publicly, but consistently. And that quiet support spoke volumes. There's one story that has lingered through the years, unconfirmed by the palace, but whispered by those close to them. When Diana faced one of her lowest moments, it was Edward who sent her a handwritten note, simple, private, and filled with kindness. Not advice, not judgment, just a reminder that someone was thinking of her. That small act may seem insignificant, but for Diana, isolated in the heart of royalty, it meant everything. As her troubles with Charles deepened and the media frenzy exploded, Edward stayed out of the spotlight. He didn't take sides, he didn't speak to the press, but he watched, he listened, and he remembered. Even after Diana's life took a different path, after the separation, after the interviews, after the public pressures intensified, Edward maintained a respectful distance. But those who know him believe his silence wasn't indifference, it was grief. A quiet ache for someone he knew had been deeply misunderstood. And then came the moment that changed everything. When the world heard the news of Diana's tragic car crash, there was silence across the palace. But according to those close to the family, Edward didn't wait for public statements or media briefings. He reportedly flew to Paris quietly and privately, requesting to see Diana one last time before she was brought home. This act wasn't announced. It wasn't part of any official plan. The palace never confirmed it. But people close to the royal circle insist it happened. And it tells us something important, that Edward's connection to Diana wasn't for show. It was real. It was deeply personal. In the years that followed, Edward became even more withdrawn. He declined invitations that referenced her. He avoided discussions about her life, and not out of disrespect, but out of a pain that didn't fit within the polished royal script. There's even talk of him deliberately keeping his distance from Camilla at family events. Not in anger, but perhaps in quiet protest. Some insiders suggest he struggled to accept the new reality of Charles's marriage, knowing what had been lost along the way. And then came another silent act that carried weight. At Charles and Camilla's wedding, Edward was one of the last to sign the guest book. What he allegedly wrote was short but unforgettable. May your happiness not come at the cost of others. The message, while subtle, sent a wave of discomfort through royal circles. It wasn't confrontational, but it cut deep. A quiet reminder that not everyone inside the family had forgotten the price that had been paid. To most, that phrase would have been brushed off. But for those who knew the history, it was a line that echoed. Edward didn't follow it up with any public statement. He didn't clarify or explain. He let the silence do the talking. And now, years later, that same silence has finally broken, just enough to shine a light on what he really saw during those years of quiet observation. He never tried to change the story, but now it seems he's ready to tell his side of it. Royal weddings are usually filled with elegance, ceremony, and tradition. Every step, every guest, every word is carefully planned. Nothing is supposed to stand out too much, especially not anything controversial. But at the 2005 wedding of Charles and Camilla, something subtle happened that didn't go unnoticed. After years of public judgment, Charles had finally married the woman he had long loved. The atmosphere was formal but hopeful. at least on the surface. Inside the palace, many saw this wedding as a fresh start, a chance to leave the past behind and move forward. But not everyone viewed it that way. Among the guests in attendance was Prince Edward. As always, he kept a low profile. No speeches, no interviews, just a quiet presence at the back of the room. But it's what he allegedly did after the ceremony that's still whispered about today. Toward the end of the day, guests were invited to sign the official wedding book, a traditional gesture, often filled with polite messages and warm wishes. Edward was among the last to sign. He wrote just one sentence: "May your happiness not come at the cost of others." 7 words, that's all. But those 7 words reportedly stirred discomfort within the royal household. They weren't angry or aggressive. They weren't even a direct criticism. But they carried weight, more than a full speech ever could. Why did this message cause such a ripple? Because those close to the situation knew exactly who the others referred to. It wasn't some abstract reference to change or modern times. It was about Diana, the late princess whose pain had become public, the woman whose emotional honesty had made her both adored and isolated, the one whose absence still lingered like a shadow over the family. For Edward, that sentence may have been the closest thing to a public statement he had ever made. He hadn't gone to the press, he hadn't done interviews, he had never told his side of the story. But that single line, tucked away in a ceremonial guest book, said more than paragraphs ever could. Insiders say the message was never discussed openly within the palace. It wasn't addressed or challenged, it was simply absorbed, quietly, uncomfortably, as if everyone knew better than to bring it up. And yet, it lingered. The comment was reportedly seen by several senior members of the family. Some found it unnecessary, others saw it as a rare moment of truth. But no one could deny that it was deeply personal. For Edward, it may have been a final tribute, a silent way of honoring someone who had never been fully accepted. The public never saw the message. It wasn't photographed or reported on in the media. But those who knew about it remembered. And now, with Edward finally breaking his silence about Diana, that moment is being looked at again through a very different lens. Was that message a warning, a statement of regret, a subtle protest? No one knows for sure. Edward never explained. But for a man who has built his life around discretion, those few carefully chosen words may have been the loudest thing he's ever said. And now that he's speaking again, this time in more than just one sentence, people are starting to wonder what else he's been holding on to all these years. If there's one unspoken rule the royal family has followed for generations, it's this: never complain, never explain. That simple phrase isn't just a catchy motto. It's a code of survival, a way to maintain control, a shield that protects the family from public chaos, even when storms rage behind palace walls. For decades, this rule worked. The royals stayed quiet, polished, distant. Problems were handled privately. Feelings were kept out of view. You smiled, you waved, and you moved on, no matter what was happening inside. But then Diana arrived. She didn't come from a world where silence was the default. She wasn't trained to bury emotions behind etiquette and ceremonial traditions. She felt things deeply, and more importantly, she expressed those feelings even when it made others uncomfortable. While others played by the old royal rules, Diana changed the script. She cried in public when she was overwhelmed. She spoke honestly about the challenges of royal life. She admitted to feeling lonely, and she didn't pretend everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. For the public, this honesty was refreshing. It made Diana relatable, real. She wasn't just a princess, she was human, and people connected to that instantly. But inside the palace, things were different. That openness wasn't welcomed. It was seen as risky, maybe even dangerous. Because every time Diana shared her truth, she pulled back the curtain on a world that had been carefully hidden for centuries. And Edward, he was watching all of it. He never interrupted, never took sides publicly, but he saw the way the family reacted to Diana's vulnerability. He saw the discomfort in the room when she spoke from the heart. He noticed how quickly some tried to quiet her voice, not through confrontation, but through distance. And perhaps, deep down, Edward understood that Diana wasn't breaking the royal rules to cause harm. She was doing it because she simply couldn't pretend anymore. She wasn't trying to rebel, she was trying to survive. And Edward, loyal as ever, stayed silent. But silence doesn't mean blindness. He saw the cracks forming in the image the royals had built. He saw how Diana's honesty resonated with the public in a way the traditional royal style never had. People didn't just admire Diana, they felt connected to her. And that connection was something the monarchy had never really experienced before. Diana's willingness to show her struggles exposed a harsh truth. The royal family, in all its tradition, was emotionally out of sync with the modern world. Edward, the quiet observer, saw how hard the institution tried to resist change. While Diana was opening hearts, the palace was doubling down on silence. While she connected, they retreated. And in that growing gap, something shifted. Diana became more than just a royal figure. She became a symbol of emotional truth. And Edward, the man who had always followed the rules, began to realize something. Sometimes silence doesn't protect. Sometimes it only hides the pain. And while he wouldn't speak publicly for decades, he would carry what he witnessed for years. Every smile masked heartbreak. Every moment where honesty was treated like a threat. Every time someone was told to stay silent when they really needed to be heard. It all stayed with him. And now, with just a few quiet remarks, he's finally starting to share what he saw inside the system that told them all, don't feel, and definitely don't speak. There are moments in history when everything quietly shifts. And at first, no one realizes it. For the royal family, that moment came when Diana's popularity began to outshine the crown itself. She was supposed to be a supporting figure, a graceful wife beside the future king. But what happened was something no one in the palace had expected. Diana became the center of the story. Wherever she went, crowds followed. Her warmth, her energy, her genuine presence made people feel like they were meeting someone who understood them. She didn't just wave from balconies. She knelt to greet children. She held the hands of people others avoided. She connected. And the more she showed her true self, the more people fell in love with her. But inside the palace, that growing love became a problem. The royal family had always moved as a unit, a structured, unified system. No individual was supposed to stand too far out, not even a princess. As Diana's star rose, the tension behind closed doors started to build. Her openness, her emotion, her willingness to speak her truth, it didn't fit the quiet, controlled image the royals had spent generations crafting. And Edward? He was there, watching all of it. He saw how the family tried to hold on to tradition, even as Diana was rewriting the rules by simply being herself. He noticed the shift, the unease, the glances, the whispers behind the scenes. The palace was struggling to keep up, but Diana was unstoppable. And while others saw her as a challenge to the system, Edward seemed to understand she was doing something deeper. She was breathing new life into an ancient institution. To the world, Diana became a beacon of compassion and honesty. To the palace, she was something unpredictable, a force they couldn't control. Edward observed the strain this created. He watched how the public's love for Diana slowly began to cast a shadow on the monarchy's old ways. The press followed her everywhere. Foreign leaders wanted to meet her personally. And the people, well, they started caring more about her than about the institution she represented. And that, perhaps more than anything, was the moment everything changed. The shift wasn't loud or dramatic at first. It was slow and quiet, just like Edward himself. But it was real. The crown was no longer the emotional center. Diana was. Her presence made the royals feel more human, but it also made their distance and formality feel outdated. And in Edward's silence, he saw the writing on the wall. The way the royal family had always done things could no longer survive unchanged. Even though he never made public statements, those close to him believe Edward was deeply affected by the transformation happening around him. He respected tradition, he valued loyalty, but he also saw how the palace's refusal to adapt was pushing someone they loved further away. And when Diana's journey came to an end far too soon, the impact wasn't just emotional, it was historical. The world didn't want distance anymore. They wanted connection, and Diana had shown them what that looked like. Edward may not have said a word back then, but today his quiet voice is finally joining the story and reminding the world of the moment everything began to shift, when a single woman's honesty quietly reshaped the monarchy from the inside out. After years, decades, really, of keeping his thoughts private, Prince Edward has reportedly let down his guard. Not in a press conference, not in a documentary, but in a quiet conversation with someone he trusted, where his words finally matched the emotion he's carried for so long. And what he said? It's now echoing far beyond palace walls. According to those close to the conversation, Edward's voice trembled as he shared a rare and deeply personal truth. She didn't deserve any of it. Not the loneliness, not the betrayal. She was more royal than any of us. Just one sentence, but it says everything. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't polished. It wasn't crafted by a team of advisors. It felt raw, human, real. And for a man like Edward, who's been described for years as quiet, dutiful, and loyal to a fault, it was unexpected. maybe even shocking. But it also felt like something that had been waiting to be said for a very long time. Let's break that down for a second. When he says she didn't deserve it, he's not just talking about public pressure or tabloid attention. He's pointing directly at what Diana endured behind palace gates. The emotional distance, the feeling of isolation, the way she was treated by those who should have supported her most. And when he says she was more royal than any of us, he's not referring to titles or bloodlines. He's talking about character, about the heart, about what the crown should represent: compassion, strength, and authenticity. Those words hit hard for a reason, because they go against the version of events the public has been fed for years. They challenge the official narrative, the one that's carefully maintained and rarely questioned by insiders. And they do something else too. They validate something millions of people have felt in their hearts for decades: that Diana wasn't just misunderstood, she was mistreated. For Edward to acknowledge that, even quietly, changes the tone of the entire royal conversation. It opens a door that's been locked tight since the 1980s, and once it's open, it's hard to shut again. So why now? Why did Edward, the family's quietest voice, finally decide to speak? Some believe it's personal. After watching the same patterns repeat themselves, he couldn't stay quiet any longer. That he saw the cracks widening and felt a responsibility to be honest about what he saw. Others think his words were carefully timed. That in this current climate, where the royal family is facing questions about transparency, fairness, and relevance, his voice could serve as a bridge between the past and the future. But regardless of the reason, his words have had an undeniable impact. They didn't come with dramatic headlines or viral interviews. They came softly, but powerfully. And in the days since, people have started asking deeper questions. What else did Edward see that we don't know about? If he's finally speaking now, what does that say about the silence that came before? Is this just a personal reflection, or is it the beginning of a much bigger reckoning within the royal family? We don't know all the answers yet, but we do know this: Edward's quiet honesty has stirred something. In the public, in the press, and reportedly within the palace itself. Because when someone who has spent his entire life avoiding the spotlight finally decides to speak, it usually means the truth has become too heavy to keep carrying alone. What do you think about Prince Edward's comments? Do you believe he spoke too late, or exactly when the world needed to hear it? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and join the conversation.